Hi, it's time for another tutorial. We're going to talk a little bit more today about half square triangles. And if you need to make a lot of half square triangles out of the same fabric, here's a couple of easy ways to do it. First of all, you get a piece of fabric and you draw squares on it. Now I've drawn these squares 5 inches square, and so that the half square triangles finished will be 4.5. Then you lay it right sides together on your fabric. In each square I drew a diagonal line. You don't have to necessarily do them in a diamond. You can do like this and do an X, but I did it this way because then when I sew it'll just be continuous sewing. And I left fabric outside of the outside line because when you sew, let me show you one that's already sewn. When you sew outside of the lines right here. And so you just keep going, and then when you sew, because you sew on both sides of the marked diagonal line, then when you sew on the inside line, you just turn at the straight lines. So you sew on the diagonal lines on both sides, and then we're going to cut them apart on all of the lines. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares here, so that will make 12 half square triangles. On this one I have 4, so that will make 8 half square triangles. Okay, I'm going to cut, and you can use your rotary cutter or you can just use your scissors, and you cut on all of the lines. We're just going to cut this section off right here, and we're going to cut on the straight lines first. So we will cut it apart, and we'll make squares just identical to the squares that we made last week, only we've made a whole bunch at once. Now you can see that there's a little bit of stitching right here on this one as well from when we cross the corners, but that will just pop right out when you open these up, so don't worry about that at all. So you cut apart on all the lines, the straight lines and the diagonal lines, and with those 2 squares that gives me 4 half square triangles. Really easy, really fast way to do it. Another way to make a number of half square triangles at once is to cut some strips that are bias strips. And these bias strips, and then you're going to sew the bias strips together. Now remember, when you sew on the bias, it's going to stretch a little bit. So I don't prefer this method, but I've seen it in a lot of books. And so let me just show you how to do it if you would like to try this. Take your bias strips, sew them together, and then you take a ruler. This is just a tiny little 2.5 inch ruler, but it fits on this, so that's what I'm going to use. You take your 45-degree angle, set it on the seam line, and then I'm going to cut this out. Now you can see that the corner right here goes over the seam line, but that will be fine when we get it all done. And I figured on this particular piece, and these aren't very big, I can probably get about 5 half square triangles. And they will be 2.5 inches, so they'll be 2 finished when I sew it into my project. I didn't want to cut past the corners because I want to leave that for the next one. I don't want to cut into the next one. Anyway, so that's another way to do half square triangles. So your bias is here and your straight's there. But again, like I say, I don't prefer this just because you have to cut your bias and then sew your bias. I'd rather sew it and then cut it. Half square triangles, like I say, are really fun. So if you need to make a lot, these are 2 fast and easy ways to get a lot done in not much time.